What's good, my Zillas? In my last video you guys saw that I tuned my Redsport. Now during the video I was getting some hesitation, and the tuner said that most likely the injector is going out. On the way home I was driving and the injector started misfiring a little bit more, so I went ahead and just purchased some injectors for the car. Now these aren't the AMS injectors, these are Deatschwerks. Believe it or not, these injectors are off the EcoBoost. So I'm going to show you guys the install process on the injectors and what modifications are needed to make these work. Let's go ahead and start working on it. Alright, so while we're waiting for Turbo P to come, we're going to go ahead and do a couple modifications to the injectors for them to actually work with the VR30. These are the EcoBoost injectors. Pretty much it's the same height. It fits very well. The only thing you want to modify on this are the side of these connectors here. As you can see, it has somewhat of a lip on the side of the connector, so you want to file that down or sand it down. Before I do that, I'm gonna go ahead and just cover up the injectors. I do not want any debris going in here. So I have a Dremel. You can buy this anywhere, maybe Walmart, Home Depot. And we're gonna shave down the side. All right, so when you're done, you should have no lip on that clip. So then the harness, the OEM harness, can actually clip right onto this and it'll become a plug and play connection. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that to all of them and I'll get right back to you guys. All right, so these are the injectors all shaved down on the sides. It's only on the sides. Do not shave down the portion on the bottom where it's supposed to clip. That's gonna lock the injector in place. Do not shave that down. Only shave the sides. So right now we're gonna start working on the car itself, and first thing we're gonna do is pull the intercoolers off. So to remove the intercooler, we're gonna wanna unfasten this clamp here, take this clip off, remove these 12 millimeter bolts. So there's one here, two down there. This is a 7 millimeter right here, and just remove this clip. You also want to loosen this hose clamp right here. If you don't have blow-off valves, it's just going to be a silicone hose. So you do the same thing to the opposite side, so then you can pull up on the entire intercooler without removing any of the intercooler lines. You got two bolts right here. You're going to want to remove those as well, so that way you can remove the entire intercooler. Alright, so now the intercoolers are pulled back. So the next thing we're gonna do is remove the intake manifold. Do yourself a favor and make sure to plug up the coupler, the one that goes into the turbo. You don't want to drop anything in there. Alright, so we removed the line here off the high pressure fuel pump.
Yeah.
And the bracket that holds this line here as well. Now we're removing the throttle bodies.
You don't necessarily have to, but it's 4 bolts.
Alright, so we removed the throttle bodies. So right now what we removed is this nut back here. There's another one where he's loosening, and then there's this, and that's a 12 millimeter bolt. 12 millimeter bolts holding down the plenum, the intake manifold, the upper. And you want to remove this clip, unfasten it. You have to also remove that PCV hose from the plenum.
You just have this vacuum line going in here, and then you have some vacuum lines on that side, right?
Yeah.
Have it set like this,
okay,
so we don't put any vacuum lines, you know? So,
Alright, so we have the upper intake manifold being held by some bungees, just so we don't have to fiddle with the vacuum lines. So right now, after he removes that other vacuum line right there, we're gonna remove the lower plenum. We taped up the heads so nothing goes in there, obviously. Alright, so now we're going to remove this nut off the fuel line here from the fuel rail. Then we're gonna use a reverse E8 socket to remove this
these studs.
Yeah, these studs off the fuel rail. We removed the 12mm nuts, and now we're using the reverse Torx socket to remove that stud to pull off the fuel rails. Before removing the fuel rail on the passenger side, there's the fuel pressure sensor in the back that you need to unfasten. If you're lucky, while you pull the fuel rail out, you might be able to have your injectors come out at the same time. If not, you're gonna have to pull each injector out one by one, like how we're doing right now. Alright, so this is a side-by-side comparison of the injectors. They look similar. There's a small difference in the part of the body here where the retainer clip normally clips onto. This is the OEM one. We're not reusing those clips just because it doesn't really sit properly on the Deatschwerks. Alright, so this is the fuel rail, the fuel rails with the Deatschwerks already installed. As you can see, it sits properly, sits fine without the actual retainer clips. Alright, so the fuel rail is in place. To remove the fuel rail, we first removed the passenger side and then the driver, and then to install, it was in reverse order. We installed the driver's side with the injectors off the fuel rail. We first put the injector inside the block and then seated the fuel rail on top. Then we went over to the passenger side and just slid the entire assembly onto the ports. So now we are installing the Torx studs. I'm gonna run down the Torx studs first, and then we're gonna lock them in place with the nuts. Alright, so once the fuel rail is in place and everything's tightened down with the nuts and the Torx, inverted Torx socket, you're gonna connect this line here into the fuel rails and then tighten the bracket back up. And now we're gonna go ahead and install the lower plenum. Alright, so the lower plenum is installed. Make sure to tighten the bolts in star formation, so tighten here, then tighten over there, just so it can sit evenly. Do the same thing with the fuel rail. Now we're gonna go ahead and install the upper intake manifold. The intake manifold is in place. You gotta make sure that you have all the vacuum lines fastened properly. And then that clip back there, make sure to pull it up so you can put it back to where it belongs. This one right here. Alright, so now we're putting back the throttle bodies. Make sure to have these water lines routed underneath the manifold to the opposite side so you can connect it onto the throttle body. So make sure to put your clamps back on. Alright, so we got the throttle bodies back bolted in place, the lines connected. Make sure to connect the harness.
Don't
forget the sensors, as well as the PCB hoses, throttle body sensors, or connectors, sorry. Alright, so you got the intercoolers back. Make sure that your couplers are seated properly, and then connect all your sensors, your plugs. You got one here, one over there. You got another one right here that he's about to connect. And then you have your 4 12mm bolts on each intercooler. Then once that is on, that's pretty much it. Just overview everything again. Make sure that all the connectors and all that's already plugged in. Everything is connected, and we're gonna go ahead and just do a test start.
This is gonna run so rich. I just prime it first though. I just want to see the pressure. If there's any leaks or anything. Alright, hold. Alright.
So right now you're gonna want to get in contact with your tuner, because obviously the injectors aren't made for the current ECM that you guys have right now. So you need to get a flash map, and that should be it. Alright guys, so that was the install of the Deatschwerks injectors. Make sure to check out Turbo P's YouTube and follow him on Instagram. And if you're new to the channel and like videos like this, make sure to subscribe. And I'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace, Zillas.